Content warning. In addition to the usual bones, blood, smut, and swear words, this podcast contains spoilers for all of Gideon the Ninth. If you have not finished Gideon the Ninth, turn back now. You know, unless you want to be spoiled. Very third house of you, honestly.
Episode 1, A Disgrace in a Vacuum. What the fuck is happening?
Oh my god, I'm going back to this sew tongue thing. She knows too much.
I'm worried that it's going to be like, you can go, but like you have to do this for us. Now I'm just worried that, this is not going to go well for anybody. Generally, when magic is powered by blood, things don't go well for most people. So,
Absolutely boned in all directions.
some people pay extra for that.
This is my biggest thing on these rereads. I am a person who, despite the fact, this will come out inevitably over the course of the podcast. 3 of the 4 of us are scientists. So in theory, people always think scientists think very clinically and very small ideas. And I can do that. I do Easter eggs, but I also am a person who mostly operates on big picture vibes, in terms of how I live my life. And reading these books the first time, I really took for granted the vibes. And one of the things that rereading these books is doing for me is in these books, everything is real. You actually should take it at fucking face value. You don't dismiss it as like, oh, maybe this is like Tamsin Muir did a bad job writing this. This witch, she does things on purpose. She's planting shit permanently and indefinitely.
I have 3 more instances, or I guess they're 2, but they're 3 more lines of things like this, of Tamsin planting things. So one of them is, here, I gotta find it in the book. Gideon and Harrow are arguing, and it says, Harrow says, "You threaten my house, you disrespect my retainers, you lie and cheat and sneak and steal. You know full well what you've done, and you know that you are a disgusting little cuckoo." And Gideon
Which
says,
also I fucking love as an insult. Disgusting little cuckoo. Mwah. Okay.
And Gideon follows up with a typical Gideon line, which is, "I hate it when you act like a butt-touched nun." But it does say, said Gideon, who was only honestly sorry for one of the things in that lineup. And the one thing that she's sorry for is, you know what you've done. And it was going to talk to Harrow's parents.
Because she blames herself for the suicides of Peliamena and Priamhark, right?
Yeah.
Which is tragic. Like, I mean, they both do. They're both
so fucked up.
Such broken children. Like, so sad that the first huge portion of their life is spent in deliberate opposition because it's the only way that they can notice one another, that they can count on one another's attention, is that they will always be fighting. It's like the only source of foundational...
Like, that's the only relationship they have, right? Which is another thing of when Harrow goes to give her a bribe, Gideon's like, "Oh, this is going to be good," right? She's like, what are you going to do? Gideon, here's some money, right? Which is like, that's what you first would expect is going to be a bribe. She's like, money's no good. What am I going to spend it on? The second thing she says, which is probably the only thing she actually wants as a bribe, "Gideon, I'll always be nice and not a dick to you if you come back."
Right. But it's like a throwaway joke because you're like, oh, it's definitely not going to happen, but if it could happen, I would love it could happen. You know?
Yeah.
It's like, that underneath, like, I'll say it out loud just in case. Yeah.
But the thing that kills me is Harrow's still pissed off at Gideon being like, "Oh, you'd actually just tell everybody, even if it would fuck us all over." And Gideon says, "It's all because I completely fucking hate you because you're a hideous witch from hell. No offense." And Harrow's response is, "Oh, Griddle, but I don't even remember about you most of the time."
I know.
And then later in that chapter, Gideon says, "I gave her my whole life."
Her entire life and her death, right? It's literally start to finish. It's completely fascinating. And also, when Harrow says, "But Griddle, I don't even remember about you most of the time," for me, that's incredibly deliberate, because I do think that Harrow Harrow does understand cruelty. And the reason Harrow understands cruelty is because of how much pain she feels and how much shame she feels. So she knows how to give it to other people. There's some things in here that are, I mean, I guess it is dropping you into a world without a lot of knowledge, but there's some things that are quite explicit in this chapter where, for instance, Harrow signs her mother's name, right? Mm-hmm. Which is like, and Gideon's like, you signed your mother's name. And Harrow's like, yeah, dude, that would give away the whole game, you dumb fuck. Like, other people still believe there's a lord and lady here and that I'm just a random child of 17.
Yeah.
Instead of the person running the entire show. Yeah.
Which gives you a lot, but also it's kind of like, oh, like, she just doesn't want the parents to know.
Fair enough. And we definitely know that, like, and Brooke picked up on this again, that Gideon knows too much and has known too much since she was 10. And I feel like when I initially read this, I thought that maybe, like, the house as a whole had some dark secret that they were, like, conspiring.
I think that's what I thought. Or there's, like, some initiate, like, ceremony or something that it's like, if you've grown up in the house and you've gone through, like, the 10-year initiation, then you don't get to leave.
Episode 2, A Bad Bone Saint.
Let's recap. Chapter 3. Gideon goes down to Drearbur. Harrowhark announces a letter from the Emperor. Ortis and his mother have a bad time. Gideon is bereft. Chapter 4. Harrow and Gideon go to the catacombs. Glamine tries to find a sword. And Gideon gets a new job.
What the fuck is happening?
I mean, based off of what we have to work with here, my eyes are on the tomb that is apparently very important to keep closed. On top of the fact that there's these huge changes in the whole Lictor lineup after literally 10 millennia.
My conspiracy theory is that all the houses are collapsing, like in a similar way to the Ninth, and so like they're all going to do what Harrow is planning on doing, which is showing up, be like, yeah, everything's cool, like my parents totally still alive. The Hunger Games, but everyone's hungry.
Oh my god.
That's my conspiracy theory.
Get in, losers. We're going speculating. I wanted to talk a little bit about what the letter implies for what a lictor is. Because that letter routinely mentions Cavaliers, mentions the both of you. You start with 16 and then you end with 8. So that's like kind of immediately there that there is going to be a transition to just 8. But there is all of these kind of intimations, and we'll get this later too. Like, teacher will say, if one of you fails, the other one does. But Harrow just fucking erases Cavaliers from her entire existence.
Well, and like when Brooke started doing the math, I was like, huh?
You were like, be careful. You're like, 8 spots left. I guess that could be true.
She's like, 16 get there, but there's only 8 spots. And I'm like, uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
No comment. Man, actually, there was another one of those for me today where John was talking about, John mentioned his theory that maybe all the houses are falling apart. Mm-hmm. And I'm just trying so hard to keep a straight face because it's fully fucking true. Like, shit is going to hell. There's like, these guys are so worried. They're so worried in these chapters, and then in the next episode we'll do about whether or not Gideon is going to be a good enough Cavalier to look like a Cavalier. And in fact, once she gets there, Gideon is basically going to be the best swordswoman in the entire fucking house.
Right.
Obviously, we know, you and I know, that Harrow is the necromantic product of at least 200 babies. Mm-hmm. But still, it's constantly implied that she is that smart and that talented. And I don't know how much of that is hard work and how much of that is just like being the product of 200 babies. But like, she is.
I don't think that you can ever, and I think it's always implied in the book that you can never unentangle those, because she started being told that she was the product of 200 babies at like 3 years old or something like that.
Right. She's always trying to live up to it. Always.
So she would never not be working as hard as she possibly could. So you would never know how much of it is natural talent and how much of it is just an insane work ethic.
I'm sorry, the whole thing is like really, really interesting. And I'm really interested in Harrow. I think she's a genuinely interesting person. She also is a bitch, and we should allow that to be true, because more than 100%. One thing can be true. But like, it's kind of interesting seeing some of this stuff from Gideon's perspective, because Gideon's always talking about how she's like simpering, or how she, Harrow will say, no one loves their house like I do. And Gideon's like, yeah, right. Except
Harrow means it.
Does. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I think the funniest thing, like on a reread, the funniest thing to me is Harrow's obsession with the powder as an offhand. And you're like, what is it with the powder? And she's like, no, I think the powder. Don't you think the powder? I really think the powder. And you're like, what the fuck is the powder? And why? And you're like, she must have read, like, in her, like, one time that she actually read a book for fun. You just know she read some romantic novel where, like, the hero or, like, the romantic lead had powder as an offhand, you know? And that, like, if you actually found this book, then they were an actual insufferable dweeb.
That actually sounds exactly right. That she had like one secret book that she like kept under her bed hidden that was like, because it had kissing in it.
But it had to be before she turned 10.
Oh, 100%. Literally everything since after that has just been the sorrow of Harrow part 2. I don't want to beat this like absolutely to death, but Gideon and Harrow's relationship is just so fascinating and tragic. I think I mentioned it, but Gideon, like, sort of ostensibly is like, okay, well, I'm not gonna, you know, like, I'm definitely not going. I have patently not agreed to this. She's saying it over and over. But we know from, like, the get-go, and I think Brooke and John knew from the get-go that she was all in, you know?
Yeah, she's like, okay, yeah, like, I'll go swing a sword, I guess.
Yeah. You know, she like kind of is trying to show off for the captain in some of that. She's like trying, like, is this how you hold it, captain? But I think a lot of it is permanently trying to show off for Harrow.
Yeah.
Which is all sorts of sad.
Well, and it's also, it's such, like, this is such classic, and I think all of the books are such classic, unreliable narrators. Like, that is the theme of every single book so far, is your narrator is inherently unreliable. And the thing that Gideon is unreliable about is her own self and her own emotions and how people feel about her. She truly does not know herself. She truly does not know other people. And I just, like, after I've read it for like the 90 millionth time, like, I can't even, it was probably like the third time through where I finally was like, oh, because I remember, like, once I read it, I would see all this stuff about people saying that this was like an enemies to lovers
arc. Yeah.
And I was like, how? Because I was very much like, they're roommates. And then, like, as you read it, you're like, oh my God. Like, it is so patently obvious how in each other's pockets, how desperately the only opinion that Gideon cares about is Harrow's. And it's the only opinion she has ever cared about, which is also why the worst thing that Harrow can ever say to her is, I don't even think about you.
Think about you.
And Harrow knows it. Harrow knows it.
Oh, of course. She's using it. We were texting earlier this week, and I think this is just the core of it, is that all of these books are sort of meditations on love, right? Mm-hmm. Meditations on what it means to love someone. And that love is sometimes sexual and sometimes not at all sexual. And sometimes it's what you thought was hate. Sometimes it's need. Sometimes it's about attention, about being seen. Something is about complementarity. It's often about gifts that we give one another, giving of yourself, and then accepting those gifts, because I think that's incredibly hard to accept when someone gives themselves to you. It feels like too much of a burden, and it's something that Harrow sucks at. Harrow's always worried that she's never going to live up to those 200 kids that she didn't make a choice about. Right. It's all very beautiful. It's deeply sad.
Some things that are kind of funny that you're like, oh, you get so caught up on the things that they say to each other that you kind of forget the actions that they have around each other, which is when you open these chapters, Harrow is out of her robes, which is her basically as close to being in her pajamas as you're going to see, right? Harrow is out of her robes, lying on a couch in the library, and Gideon is trying to do something that she is going to be doing badly in front of her, right? Which is painting her face. And also in that, right, Harrow touches her, right? Like Gideon bites her, but Harrow has no qualms about grabbing Gideon's face to go to start painting her, right? Like it's a
oddly
tender
intimate
thing. It's super, super intimate.
Yeah.
It's not
right
tender,
that, like, they
it's
both
not
start,
lovely, it's not romantic, but it is incredibly intimate.
That's exactly right. And you're right that they both start in positions of weakness in front of one another and without worry about it. That, like, because Harrow out of robes, Harrow out of, like, anything she would never in front of someone. And you can either read that as she just doesn't count Gideon as a person, or she counts Gideon as so much almost just herself that it's irrelevant. It's basically her alone in her room, because Gideon is just the other half of her. And they're both people who kind of fight with themselves anyway. So I feel like it works really well there.
Well, that's another interesting point too, is like how would they actually have a nice, romantic, happy, lovely relationship loving someone? They don't even like themselves.
Yes. They are not even a little bit. Sorry, like they both have serious, serious problems with themselves. And even as Gideon is like, yes, hot, gorgeous, like she likes herself physically, but that's partially because she works on herself physically. And I don't know, she thinks she's funny, but she just thinks she's worthless in the eyes of absolutely everyone.
Yeah,
like,
and so does Harrow.
Everyone.
Which is another thing of like, if you think you're worthless, then you cannot accept that anybody else would find you interesting or right, which is another reason why, like, when we get to Canaan House, Gideon immediately is like just clay in Dulcinea's hands, and like 100%. Immediately
Dulcinea looks at her and she's like, oh my god, a person looked at me for the first time in my entire life. Eyes must love.
Right. And like Magnus is an immediate parent figure because he talks to her. That's literally all it takes.
Yeah.
Is the barest crumb of attention, and Gideon is yours.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, okay, before I forget, I want to add one more thing, which is, you talk about these as unreliable narrators, but it's this weird combo of everything that happens, everything they say happens, every like piece of dialogue is something that actually happened, but their interpretation is shit.
Yes.
Right? Like, so they're unreliable. They are reporting facts, but the way they interpret those facts is so far off that if you believe their interpretations, then you end up well outside of the realm of what is really happening.
Yep.
So you're right that it has to be about what actually happens as opposed to like what they think.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Well,
Episode 3, 10,000 Years of Tradition.
Let's recap. Chapter 5. Harrow tells Gideon to act accordingly. Harrow paints Gideon's face. Harrow issues several threats. In Chapter 6, Gideon acts accordingly. Aglamene gives Gideon a sword. Harrowhark and Gideon say goodbye to the Ninth House.
What the fuck is happening?
Is this going to be a Hunger Games situation? We don't know. There's up to 8 spots to fill. I'm vaguely worried. I don't know if that is just me being ruined by Hunger Games, though.
The conspiracy is that everyone's houses are in decline. I see nothing to shake me off that path, but I'm probably horrifically wrong, and I can't wait to be horrifically wrong as we go deeper into the book.
Oh, thank God they're gone, because Marie, I am dying to spoil some things.
We were talking about how we have massive egos.
Yes.
And we know it, and we really like ourselves.
The other thing I wanted to talk about this chapter is like, again, like discrepancies between what Harrow thinks is going to happen and what actually happens, because Harrow is super, super smart, but she also is wrong a lot. Mm-hmm. And part of that is like lack of data, but part of it is just assumptions she makes. So we talked last time about the assumption that like she assumes the Cavalier is just kind of like a, I don't know,
bodyguard.
Yeah,
accessory.
Like a bodyguard, an accessory. That's exactly right. That it's just like something you have to have so that you look appropriate, as opposed to something that's truly integral to the process. And the other one that I think is interesting is her and Aglamene talking about what to expect. And the first thing that Harrow says is, naturally it's a competition, even though they don't say it. But it's fucking not.
It's never been a competition.
Explicitly in that letter, they talk about how they want 8 saints to make it, which is all of them. Mm-hmm. Like, she just immediately goes into this space where it's this antagonistic thing. And to be fair, she's always had to defend her whole life. Like, Harrow is a shell of, permanent bone pushing back on the entire world. But it's still, like, really sad. And then it's also interesting, Aglamene goes straight to, like, the third and the second being the best prepared.
Yeah.
And we don't ever really know enough about the houses to like really know why the third is considered to be so.
I get the thing that it's basically just kind of like the third is the Kennedys.
They are like just royalty and everyone knows it.
When you have all of these kind of like old money families and they're all in one place and they're always going to have all of the political power, it's like the third house is political power and the second house is military power. And so, of course, those are the two that you're going to have to worry about.
I get that. And like Harrow comes back with basically she's worried about the sixth house because anybody can learn to fight, but hardly anyone learns to think, which is a great line. But again, it's never a question of like who should I collaborate with or team up with. It's just a question of who to look out for.
Yep. This next one is going to have a payoff at the end of the book. And I remember at a vulnerable moment when I was rereading Gideon. We won't talk about it.
Except we are going to talk about it.
Except because that's what this whole fucking podcast is my need to continually reread these books. I was listening to it on the way to work, and I almost cried on the way to work because it's this moment where Harrow says, I think it's like at the end, like Harrow's like crying and Gideon makes fun of her and says, "Do you want my hanky?" And Harrow says, "I want to watch you die."
God, I didn't pick up on that at all.
And Gideon says,
that is
"Yeah, maybe,
devastating.
But you won't do it here." And I'm like, "No,
right,
you won't."
But you're gonna have to like, and be careful what you wish for, because like you are gonna have to deal with the full consequences of watching the most important person in your entire universe die in front of you on your behalf. Like, gives me goosebumps.
So
I get that.
Yeah, that's fun.
I know what you mean about the like. I get emotional with a lot of these things. I cried in lab twice listening to Gideon in the section where we're learning about Harrow's birth story, and just the weight that everybody bears. But then I also this week I was crying on the train home for Nona because
Episode 4. Welcome to Canaan House.
Let's recap. Chapter 7. Harrow and Gideon journey to the first house. Gideon debuts a new look. Dulcinea is rescued by a shadow cultist. Chapter 8. The Cavaliers receive their rings. Teacher gives some context. Teacher lays down the law.
What the fuck is happening?
I just don't believe them when they say that. If this whole lictor training thing doesn't work out, you can just go home. I don't really think anybody is easily getting out of Canaan House.
I'm still maintaining that we're in the everything is going sideways. We're in the twilight of the Empire. Like all the houses are failing together. And also, I have totally forgotten about this until it gets brought up. There's like an entire house dedicated to fighting wars somewhere off in space. And so fighting wars with necromancers is always interesting because like the more you kill things, the stronger necromancers become. So I'm wondering, how does that work together? Like, is it we need more bone juice? Like, is that why we're conquering things? Is there like an actual war? Are there invaders? I just have lots of questions that are completely unanswered by my conspiracy theories that we're in the fall of the Empire and all hell is breaking loose. I'm maintaining that.
Get in, losers. We're going speculating. I'm so happy we're at Canaan House. First chapter is very cool, but I'm sitting there just waiting for us to get to the full cast.
I'm waiting for the fucking aviators this entire time.
Trying not to say the word sunglasses.
The sunglass moment was the moment that I was in for this whole series. That was the moment.
I feel that so hard. It also is just peak Gideon and Harrow, including, you mentioned her being like, what are you even talking about half the time? Oh, incredible. I definitely aspire to be Gideon in this moment, and I know I never will be.
I don't think I'm either one of them. I just love them dearly.
Ditto. Completely on the same page.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about like it being Earth, and I don't know. I was wondering when you realized that, when you first read this.
I think I was pretty immediately like, if it isn't Earth, it is trying to be Earth. Like pretty immediately, because it was very definitely meant to feel like you are looking at Earth from orbit, because there's water, there's clouds, there's way more water
then
we always describe Earth as a blue planet. Like that shows up in so many different places. So me too. I immediately thought it was Earth. And then obviously the 9 houses, 9 planets thing. I mean, asterisk for Pluto. I guess asterisk for 9th house anyway. But
well, right. Like the 9th house was never supposed to exist, and Pluto is technically like we kicked it out of the solar system.
I know, devastating. Yeah, the youths who listen to this podcast, none of them will, but if they do, they will have no idea that Pluto was once a planet.
Is that true? I'll have to ask my kids. Since we can do this, I was always like, how are people such geniuses and know what planets things are on? It's fucking right there in, chapter 7? Is that what chapter we're in? Chapter 7, you start getting there.
For sure. Because 6th and 7th is fully laid out. That has to be Mercury and Venus.
6th is on Mercury. 7th is on Venus. I got to start writing this down.
If we also go with some of the Roman themes that we've been doing, Venus, goddess of beauty and love, very 7th, right? Mercury is, I mean, you could have gone with Apollo, but messenger, which feels very writing and education. And then I've always assumed that the 2nd house is on Mars, which of course, god of war.
And I gotta check myself on this, so we might be wrong.
We're allowed to be wrong. We'll come back and check ourselves. Yeah.
Earth is the first.
Earth is the first. Mars is the second.
Is the second. And then who comes next? It's Jupiter comes next, or Saturn?
Jupiter.
And then you have Saturn, which might actually be, it's like the moon's on something. So Saturn also being the jewel, that might actually be the 3rd.
3rd house. I could see that for sure.
So the ones that we don't know are Saturn, Uranus,
Neptune.
And then the 9th is Pluto.
Yeah, 100%. One of my favorite things that I feel like she brings up constantly, and I think we're going to end up talking about this a bunch, and it never really gets resolved, is Canaan house itself. Because not only is it potentially from 9,000 years ago, but it is this complex mixture of things that are obscenely old and things that are much newer. And I've been trying to be more careful about noticing these things. But there's talk about side by side, beautiful pieces of furniture, beautiful bath with the sonic. And the sonic is so clearly a much more recent mechanism for cleaning yourself. So it is this weird mixture. And I don't know when these things were built, because clearly it is this weird temple to where Lichterhood started.
But it's also how was it being preserved?
I know. Oh my God, I know. Oh, when we get to the Lichter labs, I have so many thoughts about the preservation here and why it gets preserved the way it does. Because Canaan house itself is only kind of half preserved, whereas the Lichter labs.
But they the way that the facility is described, and then the way that all of how big Canaan house is described to be, and Gideon wandering around in it, and then kind of looping around. This is my new thing. Okay, my TikTok algorithm, I left wasn't watching things for quite a while, and then I came back and my FYP was off the rails. But kind of in a good way, because it kind of gets to know you, and then it gets kind of creepy, and then it gets a little boring because then you see the exact same things all the time. So it's kind of nice that it was we don't know who you are.
Let's figure it out again. Here's everything.
And then there's also a joke that the first thing that happens to straight women on TikTok is that you will fall into a lesbian thirst trap. And that never happened to me, except I finally got thirst trapped. And the one that worked on me was a geologist. And I was of course it would be a scientist.
This makes a lot of sense to me. And you're oh, she knows so much about rocks.
So that's one thing that's going on my FYP. This is just too much information. I may have to cut this out, but I probably won't. But the other thing is, I'm going to say this wrong, but have you ever heard of the city in China called Chongqing?
No.
Oh, I'm going to send you some videos. It's literally like an MC Escher drawing. The way that, and that's exactly what I'm thinking of with Canaan House.
It does have MC Escher vibes, yeah.
Because you're never on the ground level, and the subways go through buildings. You go around the block and down a few levels, and you still are back up at the top of the hill.
Oh my God. Sorry. This sounds amazing. Please send this stuff to me. And this is exactly, you're right. Canaan house there's a part where Harrow specifically remarks, actually, late in the book, that even the massive amount that she has explored and documented can't possibly account for more than a third of what clearly is there. There's huge portions of Canaan house that don't connect, ? That
and she's always obsessed with the energy.
Yes.
Like, where is the energy
yeah.
coming from to run like the tests?
100%.
What about Dulcie? I think the
Oh my
thing
God.
that gets me the most, and I keep reading it and trying to figure out, there's two things. I can't ever figure out, and every time I read it, I go back and forth. What did teacher know? Because at some point, teacher does know. And he's just like, I don't know what you're doing here, but I'm going to leave it alone. And he's the only one that Kithareya is like, right?
Yeah.
And she stays away from, and she's a little afraid of. Like, he's the only one that freaks her out. But I'm like, does he know then? Because it's like, at some point he says Lady Septimus, and then or Duchess Septimus, and then later on he like touches her and he says, "Oh, lady, you shouldn't have come."
That's interesting. And I also, I mean, teacher, for being a giant gossip, and I love him for that, does keep his cards like close to his chest, because 100%, for instance, they know that Protesilaus is dead. And because they scanned the craft, that's why the 7th was delayed. It has to be because there was like there was a discrepancy in the number of living bodies on board or something like that.
Yeah.
So like they have to know some portion of this, because otherwise that wouldn't have happened. And I just reread deep in it when Judith fucking stabs him, or Marta or whoever, he says, "Lord, oh Lord, one of them has come back. One of them has come back." And he's like talking about a lictor. He's talking about Kithareya.
That's what I'm saying. So like, when did he know that Kithareya came back? Is that why he allowed the shuttle to land? It's like they scanned it and they knew that there weren't the right number of like, they knew there were 3 bodies, but 2 of them are dead, but also there's a lictor on board, so they have to let it land.
Well, and we don't know what they can scan for. Like, when they scanned Harrow's craft, do they know that Ortis is not there? Or is that something they only know once Gideon steps off the shuttle? Like, so we don't know the degree of information that they can gain, but definitely he figured out that she was Kithareya earlier than anyone else. I'm unconvinced that it was like totally early on. We don't have a good sense of, I guess all of the original lictors had to have inhabited Canaan House at the time that the facility was being kind of like seeded with trials. So he should have met Kithareya. And it's not like she's physically disguising herself, right? Like, she and Dulcinea Septimus actually look like 2 different people. It's just that nobody's ever met Dulcie, so it's irrelevant.
And it's also that they are related.
Yes,
Kithareya is Dulcie's great like aunt or something.
Oh yeah, and we know there's enough inbreeding there to like maintain this blood flaw. So like, you know, the genetics are pretty tight. They would look quite similar. It's interesting too, because we also know that, of course, Kithareya's eyes, which Gideon's obsessed with, these like blue limpid pools, it's not her eyes. It's got to be Loveday's eyes. So Kithareya herself, I'm still unclear on what her plan was. She, like, her explicit plan was she was trying to like goad the Emperor into coming back into the system. But I feel like there are other ways to do this.
I think she was just 10,000 years of grief.
Yes. I just don't totally understand it. I agree with John. I fucking loved Dulcinea Septimus's character, and it is because she's like a little bit flirty and a little bit sassy and a little bit sweet and 100% dying. And it's like hard for me to square that with the Kithareya that we meet when she's like being Kithareya. And like, who are the first people she kills?
She's both of them.
She kills the 5th, who are adorable, although you could make an argument that the reason was because Abigail was like a powerful spirit magician.
But that's not why. It's because she's a historian.
Right. She was asking questions about the lictors and like reading in the library. But then she kills the fucking 4th. She just kills a pair of 14-year-olds pretty fucking brutally. Like,
but it's so funny because it's like, who pushed the shuttles off? It was Kithareya.
You think so? Oh,
yeah.
Really? Okay, where are you getting that?
I think because teacher wouldn't lie about letting them leave. They were going to come, that they were going to truly figure out what lictorhood was on their own. They were going to do the whole thing again.
Yeah.
And if they didn't want to do it, they were going to leave.
I guess I always assumed that, like, in the instance that someone needed to leave or wanted to leave, that teacher would call out to the Emperor's ship and they would send in a new shuttle. But this makes a lot of sense too, because we actually don't see the skeletons push them off. We hear the patter of skeletal feet. And that's like a different thing. That means that you can't look up at them and say, aha, these are indeed the skeletons of Canaan House with their white sashes. Like, that there's no way to differentiate them from, just like a random bone construct.
Yeah. It doesn't make sense that it was the Emperor's plan or teacher's plan to trap them there. It only makes sense that it was Kitharea's plan.
This goes back to teacher, though, being like, if that's true, teacher goes up, sees the shuttles are gone, and is like, well, guess I'm not going to tell anybody because he's a weird little,
But also because he was told no communication.
And no other rules. No communication, don't go through locked doors unless you have a key, and no other rules. Like, he is there happy to let anything happen, which is fascinating.
There's another weird thing that comes up like way later, but I thought it was, and again, like fucking Tamsin, the way that the priests are described, and then the way that very last lab where you kind of see that teacher is a melange of like 50 souls, but then there's like strings going out to other things. And then when he gets stabbed and the other priests just fall and die, and all of the skeletons that are revenants fall and die.
They're all connected to each other.
They're all connected to each other, and they're described as like birds on leashes.
Yeah. So this is like all of these souls kind of tethered to this single point, which is teacher. And even though they are operating independently, they're only operating like by his grace and in, his space. That like if they went out of Canaan House, they would be nothing.
And so even the way that she's describing them, before you even know what's going on, they are described as tethered.
You're right.
And you're like, ah!
Sorry, there are so many of these things. Okay, so speaking of one, as I'm writing up like the plot details, I'm both trying to give all the pertinent information, but also not lead our newbies in any direction that might cause spoilers, right? So I tried to like include things that teacher said, but not over the top. But like, holy fuck, over and over and over and over and over and over and over, they are so specific about there being 16 at the beginning and 8 at the end. And at no point, I know, oh my God. And I didn't notice. And our newbies aren't noticing. It's this weird thing where you just like drift over it and you're like, oh, well, there are 16, but 8 of them are just bodyguards. Like Brooke's like, they're going to live, the Cavaliers are going to live with the Adepts forever. And it's like, no, they will not be there anymore because they have been eaten. Like,
yeah, but why would you ever think that? Because that is such a fucked thing.
Right. It's completely fucked, but it is the only logical explanation. And Tamsin relies on your brain and the brains of all of these characters doing extra work to smooth over the edges and make it mean something else, even though she's telling us again and again very straightforwardly what it means. And I'm just sure Alecto is going to come out and reveal a whole bunch of things where then I will go back and read Gideon and be like, motherfucker. Like, this was spelled out so clearly and I missed it. I'm here for Tamsin Muir. I really am.
Again, it goes back to, I think we talked about this last week. What is her writing process?
Fascinating woman, Tamsin Muir.
I love that, like, your notes here are that, again, textual evidence. Even Gideon notices that Protesilaus is, like, essentially a zombie.
She, like, at multiple points refers to him as being just, like, big and slow and just like a hulk of a man and a nothing of a man, the most boring man alive, like all of these things.
Right after she describes Dulcinea's skin as translucent and waxy because she looks like she's dying and she's literally dying, she describes his skin as waxy, but probably because he's sweating or something.
Right, dismisses it, but it's like, no, because he is dead. It's same reason.
Yeah.
Same.
Same. A sack full of lemons. And I could take him.
Also, Gideon feels like she could take anyone. You know that whole thing about how, like, a disturbing percentage of people, and by people I mean men, think that they could take a bear in a fight? I feel like Gideon is that person.
Yeah.
And you know what? She's mostly right, but still, there comes a point when you gotta be like,
Oh, baby.
Yeah. Okay, the last thing that I do want to touch on and I don't know if you have more things, I do kind of want to ask you what you think about the third, because I understand that Anthe and Coronabeth basically have been keeping up this sham their whole lives so that they would never be separated, but I still don't understand why they didn't just make Corona the Cavalier. That seems like such an obvious logical choice to make rather than having her pretend to be a necromancer. And then bringing her to this trial seems like such an obvious way to get caught. But I think they've just literally never been apart. And they just have so much anxiety about being apart that they will do anything to be in the same space together.
It comes down to like, what were you think? I think they're thinking like, well, Corona just won't make it.
But that's insane.
And she'll go back to be the princess. And that's fine.
Yes, so just fucking leave her there. Like, it's so baffling to me. And it's also really interesting because, like, you know, right at the beginning, when they scan the third shuttle, they're like, oh God, something's wrong. A priest comes up to teacher and mumbles something that Gideon catches, which is basically about there's 3 of them, like, it's going to be a problem. And teacher says, oh, no, just down the line. And it's only a problem for them. Yeah. And I, like, because also, this tells you right away, teacher does know what lictorhood is. Like, he is aware that it is something that has to be a single necro and a single cav merged together.
Yeah, he absolutely knows. He was there. He was part of it. He was like one of the practice projects as they were figuring out part of the pieces. Like, I forget whose project he was.
He's the sixth house. He's a sixth house project. Episode 5, Alone Amid Very Strange Strangers.
Let's recap. Chapter 9, Harrowhark leaves Gideon a note. Or 2, Gideon meets the 4th and 5th. Gideon discovers a door. Gideon spies on the 3rd house. Chapter 10, Gideon meets a mayonnaise uncle. Dulcinea loves a captive audience. Chapter 11, Bronabeth organizes some sparring. Gideon shows her stuff. Nabirius is technically a sore winner.
What the fuck is happening?
I think Harrow's doing some secret, sneaky shit that no one else is aware of. Like, she's just like flitting around in the background while everyone's doing politicking and everything, and she's using that to just explore the house, figure things out, maybe try to find some more forbidden knowledge.
Yeah, we definitely get the idea that there is a couple people who seem to know more than we do. There's also Dulcinea and what's her cav's name?
Pertessalauus.
And something about like, it is shut. So like, are they looking for a specific door out of the multiplicity of doors?
Yeah, my other conspiracy theory is that the Emperor is on the planet somewhere because they keep commenting about how good these skeletons are. Maybe the teacher is the Emperor. That's my current conspiracy theory, perhaps.
There's one other conspicuous theme that I am super excited about, which is all these references to Nonius, the ancient legendary Ninth House Cavalier. And I'm wondering if like maybe we're going to get a whole sort of like history repeating itself since we're doing the whole lictor replacement. I don't know what's happening exactly. Like we're here to become lictors, but also no instructions. And now people are just starting to do stuff. I think that it's notable that we were given some advice by a teacher at the beginning saying like, your success and your cav success are the same. And now I'm wondering if it's like, you know, the idea is to create a team of like 8 lictors plus cavs. Like maybe there needs to be, maybe the intention is that they actually are able to all kind of like work together. And this is, instead of being forced into these situations, they work it out amongst themselves or not.
Get in, losers. We're going speculating. Hey, Queen, you look fucking amazing. It also was just fucking hilarious because I didn't know you were doing it, and so you signed on, and it was like
I was sure that you were going to figure it out from the text message. I said, perfect that you're running 5 minutes late. For promotional material purposes, could you make sure that you were Zoom recording before I turn on my camera?
Hysterical.
Big eyes.
I literally did not see this text message because it didn't load onto my computer until like after I sent you the one where I was like, how are you doing? And I sent you, how are you doing? Because I was like, did she forget? Like I didn't know because
my face password does not recognize me. Excellent.
Sorry, of course it doesn't. I'm really excited to chat with you this week. It's 3 chapters where you get to meet like the whole cast, not the whole cast, but you get to meet a lot of people, and we know a lot about them. Our newbies don't know a ton about them. Who do you want to start with? Should we talk with Dulcinea?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that I noticed this time is like Dulcie asks her to take off her glasses, which is I think a weird thing to do if you don't already know that the eyes are going to be important. The next thing, so Brooke noticed this, that Pro says it's shut when he comes out to visit her on the terrace. And I assume that he's talking about the specific door that she locks with like a clot of everlasting bone, perpetual bone, right? Which is the last room that they end up finding Ianthian.
Which is her room.
It's her room, yeah. So I feel like that's actually something that she visited basically day one and locked up very early on. I mean, her whole reason for being down there is out of fury towards the Emperor. She loves the Emperor, but she is trying to take down the Emperor from the get-go.
Yeah, this is weird. I think we're going to have to revisit this because now all of my memories of like what happens at the end of Gideon and what Kithurea's motivations were is getting kind of muddled, because it was also just a lot of it was her being literally insane over dying for 10,000 years and living with the grief
of the loss of her cavalier, the loss of Loveday for 10,000 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that certainly is an enormous component of it, but it is targeted to the Emperor, right? Her goal is to bring down the 9 houses such that the Emperor will have to come back to this place that is dangerous.
Specifically to have him end, even if it ends the 9 houses.
So, I mean, it's not just a general like going insane and lashing out at everything. It is very much about him and what he has forced her to go through. I also, this is nothing, but like in terms of notes that one leaves, right? So like this episode, we talked about Harrow's passive aggressive notes, which are my favorite. And I should have told everyone this, but I once had a landlady when I was living in this tiny little room in her house in France because I was working there for a summer, and she would leave me passive aggressive post-it notes about how long my showers were, which by the way, she would time them and leave the like number and be like, please conserve water. And it was like 15-minute showers. It's not like I was in there for like an hour. They were like reasonable fucking amounts of time. Anyway, long way to go for that. But I also love that Kithurea has been like leaving notes in sort of like big bloody style letters, like when she's like, Det the 4th, sweet dreams. And it just seems, it's not even unhinged. It's just so fucking childish in this weird way that makes no sense to me.
Like, it absolutely does make sense to me if it's just like a complete emotional outburst and you have, like, if you could actually like write a furious emotional note 4 feet high in blood sometimes, wouldn't you?
Sometimes you need that. This is like really what therapy is just being able to like in blood write down fuck your face. Like,
yeah, 4 feet high in blood.
Yes,
like if you could, wouldn't you?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I take back everything I said. This is completely on point. You're there.
Kithurea did nothing wrong. You heard it here first.
All right, we will get back to Kithurea as we keep going along through this, I'm sure, because Dulcinea's actions and Kithurea's actions in this are super, super intriguing. Do you want to talk
also the whole thing about Pro coming back and saying it's shut? It brings up a lot to me of like, was this like a thing that Tamsin came back to and was like, maybe that was just like a weird little way that I wrote that. Does it have a purpose? Was that Dulcinea putting on an act with Pro, or does it say something about his autonomy and the way that she's piloting him around? Because it's very specifically that Harrow always speaks for her parents and has given them a vow of silence. And I don't remember like she ever tried to make them talk as meat puppets.
We have no idea whether or not she did. We know that the vow of silence is like a new thing that she did for them as she was leaving because she presumably couldn't be there. But actually,
no. She locked them. She locked them away.
She locks them away. Right. You're
because
right. She did give them a vow of silence.
But she gave them a vow of silence very early on because it's too hard to make them talk.
So actually, one of the things that's like emphasized in these chapters is these skeletal constructs. And we learn much later that really the reason they're so good is because they are in fact whole people, whole souls. That's why they're able to do such complicated things. It's just that their bodies have decayed. And in contrast, obviously the meat puppet style is very much a situation where it is not autonomous, where you can do basic tasks, but like you have to assign them tasks. I will say that the difference between Harrow's parents and Pro is that
Harrow was 10.
7th house. Harrow's 10. The 7th house has been perfecting this, and Kithurea's Electra. Exactly. So all of this is kind of
but also why say it's shut?
Sorry, this is why, and I think it's fascinating. I think it is notable that Protesilaus and Kithurea posing as Dulcinea actually get a key on their own. And the fact that like most of the time Gideon sees her out there reading romance novels on the terrace makes me wonder if it was a type of like trial that she could just send Pro to do himself and grab the key, or if they actually went down there and did it. And I could see it going either way, but it's unclear to me, you're right, how much autonomy, how much she really just sends Pro to actually do things, and how much Pro is just kind of like hiding in Cytherea's closet 90% of the time until she takes him out because she needs to look like she has a cavalier.
Right, because it's not like if you have a meat puppet, it's not like you can see through their eyes, right? It's not like he could go do something and then report back to her.
No. He could bring her things physically. And to be fair, she knows what all the trials are ahead of time because she was there, presumably, when they were being generated.
So, I just really don't get the purpose of saying it's shut other than a play act for Gideon.
All right, well, we'll come back to it. I want to talk a little bit about the third house. In our notes here, we have a funny little conversation back and forth. I asked you, I feel like this conversation between the three of them makes explicit that Ianthe is the only necro in the family. And I asked whether you figured it out at this point.
No, I never figured it out until Ianthe at the very end is like giving her villain monologue. And I was like, what? It was all there. This makes so much sense.
I figured this out immediately from this chapter, and I was so confused the entire time. So like there's a part later on when they're talking about which twin to look out for, and Harrow is like the tall one, which obviously means Corona. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? First of all, necromancers are always these weak, flimsy things. You should just be pointing to the weak, flimsy one no matter what. But secondarily, I mean, Harrow's not there for this conversation. I felt like this was so explicit. They're sitting there talking about how Corona's really happy that there isn't a lot of necromantic theorems to do. And Ianthe's like, yeah, because you would suck at it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and looking back at it, you're just like, oh, you're such a dumbass for not getting that.
No, this was the only thing that I ever figured out in real time in the book. I missed so many other things, and for whatever reason, I was like, yes, I've got you, J'accuse. It was this part where Ianthe says it's not a good idea to attract the attention of the necromancer of the third house. Anyway, like, apparently Brooke and John didn't get it either. They were. Yeah. I was trying not to hint.
Yeah, it is so explicit. It is so explicit. It's so funny. I never got it. I never figured it out until she did her villain monologue.
We learn a lot of little bits and pieces about different people.
And I also think it's really funny because it makes it seem that during the duel that Corona is like this rogue necromancer, like flitting about with the Cavaliers. And it's
she's like dallying with the Cavaliers while the necros do boring shit.
There are no necromancers there.
Yes, that's exactly right. It is literally all Cavaliers, because Corona easily could have fucking been the Cavalier of the third house. There's not a single necromancer there. And yeah, Corona's always, it's a little sad. All the necromancers are hanging out together in the library, and Corona only hangs out with the Cavaliers. And it's like this, I don't know how to explain it. It just feels, anyway, okay, it's fine. We're gonna walk past it. Oh, I will say this. I really do think that Corona is more interesting than people give her credit for. I think she's so funny. Even like all these little coy things, her love of dad jokes, her like immediate laughter when Magnus says that he
Cavalier primary. And Corona is like, this is amazing, and like immediately laughs, and like Gideon is like secretly like, I've got to write that down later.
Exactly, because Gideon fucking loves a dad joke. She assumes puns are automatically funny. So obviously, like, one of the old things that's truly there are the lictoral labs. And I am obsessed with the doors. Like, this description of the doors is so elaborate. And I have no idea what it means, but I see your face right now, so I think you do.
I do. So the first thing you think of is you're like, okay, the skulls, like the snakes. You're like, that is absolutely a snake's. It's absolutely laurels.
Yes.
Across the lintels. The thing that really got me was the 5 circles connected by lines. I was like, the fuck, right?
Yeah.
And there's animal skulls, and you're like, it's got to be cows, maybe?
Sorry, I went straight to like hardcore interesting antelope. I went to oryxes because I love an oryx. Like, yeah.
Yeah, something like that or whatever. Okay, but whose lab do we know this is? We know this is the second house lab.
Right.
Okay. The second house is the cohort. The cohort is the military, which is also
so far
on Mars.
Okay.
Mars is the god of war.
Mm-hmm.
Mars is the god of war in Roman mythology.
Aries. Oh my fucking God. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. That's genius. I love you so much. That is incredible.
Okay, keep going for the rest of the class. What are the skulls?
The Greek god of war is Ares. Ares is also like goat, ram's horn, like the
constellation and the astrological sign
is.
So go look up the astrological like sign and the constellation Aries.
So the constellation itself, the 5 dots connected, is the constellation, and then you have these animal skulls next to it that is Aries. That's amazing. Can I tell you where I went, which failed immediately?
Yes.
I was like, perhaps it is Braille, and it's like the number for each one. And I went and I looked it up, and I was like, no, it's not that.
Well, and so now I don't remember what the other labs look like.
Yeah.
I do remember that all of the keys have colors associated with them. Like she went like full Hogwarts house.
Colors and styles as well. Because like some of them are like more like the 6th house looks like it's going to open a cabinet. You know, it's very utilitarian.
It's like gray and utilitarian. I remember that the 2nd house is red. Nice. I think the 3rd house one is like gold and curly Q. I don't remember what the doors look like for everything.
No. Well, but that's because actually
I don't know if they're described.
Gideon only sees a couple of the doors because Harrow goes off and looks at most of the Lictor labs on her own, actually.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Sorry. I'm so excited about the Aries thing, which I can't believe I didn't put that together. And now I'm looking at your notes and it's all here. And I now feel like my freak out was like a little bit over the top.
And so I do have to give credit because I was sure, I was like, there's gotta be something here where I'm gonna feel really stupid when I get there. Yeah. So I did have help with this. It wasn't completely me. And I went and like looked up on
what Reddit is for.
That's what Reddit is for.
This is the joy of having a whole community of people who are deeply obsessed with conspiracies that are fictional, is all of us together are freaking the fuck out over it.
Yeah, but now it makes me wonder, like, if all of, like, do all of the planets have an astrological assigned to them? I think they do. Or many of them do. Not maybe all of them, but many of them do.
It's interesting. We definitely will have to, like, think about this. I know that the 7th house one is like 3 dots in a row. So we might be able to like, we will work on this. We should figure this out and we can assign things outwards. For me, the snakes immediately, anytime you have like snakes slithering around vegetation, I go straight to Adam and Eve.
The other thing is I forget what they're called, but it's kind of like the general, like also part of like Roman mythology, or like these kind of like general, gods or deities of like the house or the home.
Yeah.
Or like the protectors, they're associated with snakes.
Interesting. We're going to have to keep going. I am going to create a murder board.
You keep threatening.
Okay. And it's going to happen. It's going to happen tomorrow afternoon.
Episode 6, Sweat and Blood and Old Burnt Bone.
Let's recap. In Chapter 12, Harrowheart goes missing. Gideon encounters the 6th. Gideon discovers the facility. Harrow doesn't die in a bone.
What the fuck is happening?
I think we're in a uber dangerous escape room. And I don't think that is, like, too conspiratorial, to be honest. I mean, we have all these little mysteries that at least Calamities are like, these are clues to a test. Which, to be fair, we are in, like, some sort of a training arc that is not involving much in the way of training. So if nothing else, at least there's going to be some mystery that needs to be solved, presumably with some sort of teamwork that we are mostly failing at, although 6th and 9th, good job on you guys. Let's see if we can make this work. We need to get off this planet at some point. Like, we are supposed to become lictors. And
I think this is the facility or the lab where they created the lictors and or discovered necromancy. Ugh. I'm still going my conspiracy theory that all the houses are slowly failing and the energy is leaking out of the universe. And I thought this was really interesting and we didn't get to bring it up. When Gideon wants to join the military, when she's talking about like her dreams there where she'd be like dropped out of a ship and kill people, this would make sense. But the necromancers fight like via zombie kind of logic where like they kill someone and then they raise it for their side. So it's like a net +2, but they need someone to start the killing. So what it sounds like happens is they drop a bunch of soldiers in, the soldiers kill some people initially, then the necromancers show up and are like, wah, raise the skeletons. And then that's how they actually conquer the planet. And my rampant speculation is that's how they've kept the necromancer power going for so long is that they've just been killing planets to try to fuel the Empire, and they're running out of planets, and that's why the lictors are dying.
Get in, losers. We're going speculating.
I definitely have things to say about
I do too.
What their spoiler or like their like conspiracy theories are.
This was the number one thing that I wanted to say was like, we should have chosen people so much dumber than the people we chose. They're too smart. They're too smart, Marie.
No. This is perfect. This is perfect because I'm so excited for somebody to really have the experience on a first read through of actually totally getting what's going on without having to reread. You know what I mean?
Bits and pieces, because they're also part of the whole thing is like, as you're reading it, you're speculating, you know, like you're percolating, you're trying to figure out what's going on, but you're always uncertain. You're always off balance. I'm desperately trying to control my face, which I don't do well.
No, that's the problem.
But I'm also like trying to not go like too hard so that it's like I'm doing this like solemn nod no matter what they do, just trying to keep my shit together.
Also very tickled that John was so pissed.
Oh my God, that was the best. I actually I have a lot of anxiety about many things, but especially about people not liking me. And the whole time I'm sitting there being like, do you think John's actually mad at me? Is he really mad at me? I'm literally going to a party with him this afternoon. I was like, oh no.
I don't think he's actually mad at you.
I think he'll survive. Okay. I think he'll be okay.
I also think he's probably started reading right now.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Can I bring up actually a weird thing that relates to like to Pal being surprised or not? Mm-hmm. There's this moment where so like Gideon kicks open the bone cocoon and both like Pal and Camilla flinch, and I think it's because they think that it like would hurt Harrow either physically or maybe like emotionally, necromantically, right? But weirdly, the actual thing that freaks him out, I have it here somewhere. There's this like weird moment where air wheezed out of Harrow's lungs. That's when like Gideon picks her up and throws her over her shoulder. Air wheezed out of Harrow's lungs and the bone cocoon dissolved into a shower of chips and pebbles. This seemed to be the one thing to really unnerve the sixth house necromancer. And I was like, what the fuck is going on there? What about that is like the thing that is wild?
Well, and then he like goes and he's like measuring it and like being like how much of it is and like how thick it is. I think it's just like he's also really unnerved by the amount of power it would
that
take
Harrow has
to like throw that up, to hold it, and to like basically hold it without. Like basically to throw it up and hold it without it like taking constant energy.
Yeah, which actually, you know, so this goes to something our newbie said as well, right? They were talking about how the skeletons, you just kind of put them together and they walk around, but that's like not entirely true. Harrow sort of has to focus on her skeletons to keep them going. She discards them when she doesn't need them anymore because it is like extra work. And the skeletons in the first house are not normal skeletons. They're literally like a real soul piloting a skeletal body. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you need to put any energy into that because the soul is literally what's driving it. And so it is interesting. Maybe it's really like impressive that not only did Harrow create this thing, but it's still partially holding together even when she's like fully unconscious. And it's not until she literally lets go and the air wheezes out of her lungs that it fully disintegrates into chips, that she's able to completely hold it without any concentration at all. She certainly is. I mean, I think there are three people so far in the series who say that they're the greatest necromancer of their generation. It makes me giggle every time. And Ianthe is one of them, and Pal is one of them. And I think that both of those, I think they're probably right. They are genuinely these truly other level necromancers that have not been seen in years and years and generations on their house. And Harrow is for sure one of those. She is one of the great necromancers of probably the necromantic era, but that's partially because she's powered by minimum 200 souls. Yeah. Episode 7. It's Gideon Nav talking time.
Let's recap. Chapter 13. Gideon Nav wants answers. Harrow Hark debuts her map of many doors. Harrow takes Gideon along for the ride. Chapter 14. Harrow skeletons can't hack it. Gideon fights a bone monster. The test was inside you all along.
What the fuck? is happening?
Okay, so hear me out. I'm going full conspiracy.
We want it.
The next book is all about Harrow the Ninth, right? Mm-hmm. All I know about the next book is the title. Mm-hmm. So what if she, like, completely takes over Gideon's body, and Gideon is kind of like no more, or like shoved into like super subconscious, and like a lictor is actually two bodies in one, or two souls in one?
Oh shit.
That's pretty bonkers.
I don't want to know what that oh shit means.
Look, that's where I was going. It's like we're gonna get two souls, one body. We're gonna get like a more like a merging type of thing as part of the process. Like that's the way that you pirate. Or my other conspiracy theory is that part of the way that this works is you just like to become these super powerful necromancers, you have to absorb the souls, and like the 10,000 unfed screaming ghosts are just fuel to the fire. It's a conspiracy theory. It doesn't have to make all the sense in the world. It just has to sound good.
Yeah. Both of those are real dark, too, which, makes sense for a book about necromancy.
You asked for a wild conspiracy theory.
Love it.
Oh, no, actually, you asked for meticulously researched, I suppose. But
I'm also throwing out the teacher might be the emperor. I'm throwing that out there. Just
oh my goodness, John!
Anyway, get in, losers. We're going speculating.
First off, holy fucking shit on those rampant speculation calls. We need dumber friends. Marie, we need to work on getting dumber people into our life.
No, it's fine. It's fine. But also...
That was amazing. That was an incredible call from both of them.
Also, we took two smart friends and only gave them 2 chapters a week and, like, pressure and a homework situation. So, like, what did we expect?
This is true. They're murder boarding themselves. Which, by the way, I've started, dear listener. I will share it with you maybe next week. But I feel like John and Brooke also are murder boarding. Brooke definitely takes notes.
Yeah. Well, and SAT time.
That was so fucking cute.
Of course.
But I love, so she's like, maybe, they take over Gideon's body, which of course is almost exactly the inverse.
Yeah.
So they both come up with this 2 souls become one thing for lictors. One thing I want to be pissy about. Okay. You all know I'm obsessed with Canaan House, so I am just 6,000ing it. But Harrow says at one point, I know Sextus is obsessed with dating the structure, but as usual, he's getting caught up in the details. What's important is the function. And I feel like this is actually a flaw of Harrow's, is to focus on function. And she literally just never looks at the big picture. And I think this is part of why she missed the fact that calves were going to be so important, right? She's thinking about function. She's like, the goal is to become an epic necromancer. I am the necromancer. Therefore, I'm the only part that matters. And clearly, if she had even, like, at any point read the letter, listened to teacher, the numbers do not add up. There are 16, they become 8. Like, she should have known that calves were going to be essential. All of the shit teacher says at the beginning is like, your cavalier and your necromancer need to work together. And it just cracks me up to no end that it's only once her cavalier goes into this room that she's like, oh.
Yeah. I feel like that's pretty good. A pretty good thing to still be pissy at Harrow about. It's fine.
It's fine. Teamwork is adorable. I also, I'm a collaborative gamer. I'm not a video gamer, but I'm a board gamer, and I like collaborative games. And I really do just feel like all of these necromancers and calves could have just been lab mates, but no. All right. Now that I'm done being pissy, I do want to point out one thing. So last time we talked a little about these labs, and I couldn't remember which lab this winnowing challenge was in. But of course, and I can't believe I feel like such a complete doofus for not picking up on this the first 18 times I read it. Lab number 2 has the winnowing challenge because it's the second house challenge that
gives you the second house key.
Exactly. It gives you the second house key, like the siphoning challenge that they do. It's in Laboratory 8. And so that's really explicit, but it's interesting to me that there are 10 labs. Right? The numbers do not add up. So this kind of goes into the shit that you wanted to talk about this week, which was in general.
What is lab 9? There should only be 8 labs.
So I guess the question is, what is lab 1 and what is lab 10?
Yes.
Because we know that 2 through 9 correspond to people who, would be saints. There's a clear discrepancy. There is some extra shit there.
Yeah. And this basically just comes to like what I wanted to talk about in this spoiler section, which is just math and the way that things do not add up, right? So
this week in SAT prep.
Yeah, this week in SAT prep, the math. So first, one thing that comes up in terms of numbers being really weird is the number of doors. So not just even the number of labs, because we already said this, right? It's like there's 10 labs. The reason that there are 9 houses is because house number 1 is the emperor's house, but he didn't have a piece.
Although that doesn't mean that he didn't leave shit down there. Like, it would be interesting if he has experiments down there that are unrelated to this.
But it still does mean of like, what is the 10th lab? It still does leave it of like, what is the 10th lab? But in terms of the doors, so Harrow counts 775 doors, and she says 6 of them are locked. I think that the door count is weird. I think when she means that 6 of them are locked, I don't think that she's counting the hatch.
I don't think so either, because also, no, I think you're right. I don't know why I think you're right, but I think you're right.
I like reread it a few different times because she says there are 775 doors, 6 of them are locked. And then when she's describing it later, she says there were 2 lock points. One of them was the hatch and the other was a door.
Okay. So she's being quite specific about what makes a door. Yeah. I like that.
So I feel comfortable in saying that there were 775 doors that she counted. 6 of them are locked. Gideon gives her another door that gives you 776. 7 of them are locked.
Yes.
So that still means that there is another door that she's missing, which would give you 8 locked doors, 8 Lichter labs, which means the number of doors is 777. 7 is the number of like in numerology and like biblical terms. 7 is a perfect number. That's why 666 is like the bad number, is because 6 is almost perfect.
Oh, interesting. It's like aspiring to be perfect, but not, that's fascinating.
7 is perfection. 10 is perfection. So 6 is an evil number because it's almost perfect, which means 9, it's never really used that way, but that's why 9 is a number that makes you kind of uneasy. Yeah. Because it's almost perfect.
Yeah.
So that's why 9 houses, like there's 9 houses because there's 9 planets, but there's also makes it kind of weird that it's 9, but then there's also 10 labs.
Sorry, I mean, there's a lot of things here that make sense.
But there's another thing to it as well. 8 in biblical terms or in biblical numerology is sometimes used to refer to things about resurrection or new life or new beginnings.
Interesting. Which is almost a little too on the nose. Like, that is exactly what this is. Yeah. I almost wonder, to be honest, I realize that there are 9 planets, but also there aren't 9 planets if you're going to do, like, technically Pluto's a dwarf planet.
But also, technically that house was never supposed to exist.
It's intriguing.
The math doesn't add up. And that ends your SAT prep. Episode 8. So usefully down in the dark.
Let's recap. Chapter 15. The 5th, throw a party. Gideon's biceps are both huge and enormous. Harrow leaves in a huff. Chapter 16. Harrow gets inside Gideon's head. Gideon grabs a new key. Death of the 5th.
What the fuck is happening?
So I think we're learning here with the whole demolishing of the bone construct and then receiving a key that like Lichter training seems to be like a series of locked doors that maybe provide access to trials that like test the skills of necromancers. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting right now, is that this is very video game like. Defeat a boss, get the next task. And this first test is basically kind of like the first step of puppeteering. I talked about this like last week. I started on the path of whether or not Harrow is going to be taking over Gideon's body. And like, that's like what a Lichter is of some sort, is like these 2 souls in one. But now I'm like actually getting further freaked out by this concept because of the word Lichter, which I think we mentioned in an early episode when we first got introduced to the word, that like it has roots in the word lich, which is like this undead sorcerer. Or like maybe an immortal necro. So like maybe we all have to die to become Lichters? Like,
Similar to our last episode, I think we're getting something along those lines, but my new rampant speculation is I assume they're going to try to bring Magnus and his wife Souls back, right? Or at least get them to talk, right? Like that's the first thing I'd be doing.
Oh yeah, the Ninth House can do that. Well, the nuns can.
I'm very curious to see, not intellectual property because that's not the right thing, but like how do your who owns the bodies when you bring stuff back, right? Like who can you just are you just allowed to turn them into skeletal constructs immediately? Like we just got some fresh bones.
Yeah, what are the legal regulations around dead bodies?
Get in, losers. We're going speculating.
So.
Sorry. There are a lot of things to talk about. And where would you like to start today?
Why are they too smart? If I were reading 2 chapters a week, I still wouldn't be that smart.
No. They're such dedicated, wonderful, smart people. And it cracks me up because I really have been getting routine text messages from people who are listening to this podcast. And one of the things multiple people have said is, oh my God, they must be reading so closely. Like they are picking up on so many things. It's delightful. I am wildly impressed. And horrified.
Oh yeah. And it must be, I don't know, it'll be fascinating because it's going to be such an interesting experience for them to have read it so closely.
Yes.
I think because they're such close readers, I was a little worried that maybe they would enjoy Gideon, but maybe they wouldn't want to continue. I think they've got him.
They are all in forever. This is, Marie and I were talking about this when we started this podcast. We were like, if we have to recruit new newbies, that's okay. But no, these are ours now.
We've got them.
We will eat their souls.
Nom, 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 nom.
One thing that I really wanted to talk about actually was Cytherea. Because there's a couple of things that I noticed in this reread that I hadn't noticed before, where she, one of the things she says to Gideon is, I liked that dinner. It was useful. And this is exactly the shit where Harrow's working hard in the facility, but she's not really looking at the political spectrum. And you do learn a lot from just talking to people. And what Cytherea learns is that Abigail is dangerous, right?
Well, because the reason that Abigail came was not necessarily because she was so interested in being a lictor, but because she's such a fucking nerd about the lictors themselves.
Oh, yes.
And so when she goes on that conversation about how she wishes the Sixth House would let her see their records, and she's so interested in Canaan House itself, Cytherea goes, oh, time to kick off the party soon.
Yeah, 100%. That's a great point. When would it have started and who would it have started with? We don't know, because the context is, and I think this is really interesting too, right? Brooke said the weakest house is out, but the Fifth House isn't the weakest house. And actually part of the reason it's targeted is because it's a shockingly dangerous house for Cytherea, both because of Abigail's obsession with lictors, but additionally because of her prowess with spirit magic. She's not a trivial necromancer. She's quite good. She just doesn't have to brag about it. And you get this, it's one of those things that's fundamentally different between, say, the Fifth House and the Ninth House, because the Ninth House is all about secrets, and Harrow's not going to reveal how much she knows, whereas Abigail's happy to share that she doesn't really care about being a lictor, that she just wants to share about all the cool little uncoded, unencrypted messages she's been finding in the library. She's so open about it, and it totally fucks her over.
I wonder if it wouldn't have happened this night if Cytherea hadn't been listening and hadn't heard Abigail have the same conversation that Harrow heard Abigail have, which is, how do I get down in the facility?
True.
It's maybe Cytherea would have waited until Abigail was going down.
Yeah, because it definitely is it's certainly to Cytherea's advantage that the first death happens in the facility, because that makes it, oh, maybe it's ghosts, as opposed to, oh, maybe it's murder among the competition. Right? So they'll discuss that next couple of chapters, what's really going on here. But there is always the option that the facility is just that creepy and that it's something inherent to the facility. Rather, the assumption does not immediately go, okay, we have 14 suspects.
And what's going to happen pretty immediately is that it's not going to be just the Fifth House.
Oh, yeah. We're starting here. This is one of these things where chapter 12 is the first time you enter the facility and you're like, oh damn, things are heating up. And from there, basically every chapter or every other chapter, it is fast. We are about to hit like point on point on point. Somebody dies every 2 to 3 chapters, and you have no idea who does it. And every other chapter you have a different suspect. Like today, Brooke's suspect is the second house because they're, because of the intelligence files.
Let her.
But it also doesn't matter, because every chapter there's going to be a new person that you massively suspect as being the one who is causing all of this chaos.
Did you have any suspects?
Not this early. So I basically, as we go along, maybe we'll do what Hannah thought was happening each time. But I had a period where I was sure it was Harrow Hark. I had a period where I was sure it was Silas, because he's just the fucking worst. And then there's a brief blip, like a paragraph long, where I was like, no, Palamides? How could it possibly be Palamides? And then, and then it reverts again.
Right, which is where you're led to. I think at this point I was like, ghosts?
For sure, because it's a fucking necromancy book, and that's what teacher explicitly says it is. And also, you and I know there are ghosts down there. It turns out that they're not relevant to the series of murders, but there fucking are ghosts down there, and it is incredibly dangerous.
Another thing that I thought was really funny about the dinner party that still has to do with Cytherea is Protesilaus taking so long to answer.
Sorry. I heard you mention that in the first half, and it made me laugh so hard. She's holding a lot of conversations at once, okay? And she's eavesdropping on everybody else.
Right. There's that, she's holding her conversation. She's eavesdropping on everybody. She's holding the conversation with Harrow and Pro, even though she's doing a shitty job of it. And that's part of the reason why Gideon comments how fucking exhausted
she is at the end of this dinner. That's a great point. She's doing a lot.
Yeah, of course she's exhausted.
Actually, the other thing I want to talk about with Cytherea is there is that moment between ostensibly Dulcinea and Palamides, but of course between Cytherea and Palamides. And it is a moment that Gideon does pick up on. And Brooke's right. She says that it's not smolder, but that's because Palamides' love for Dulcinea is not sexual, or not entirely sexual. It's this really deep, pervasive love. It's someone he's been in love with since he was, what is it, 12?
Well, and this is him testing it out, because he's like, why haven't you talked to me yet?
Yes. And here's this is one of these classic things, right? Palamides is objectively the smartest person in the whole house, and possibly the smartest person in this current universe, right? And still, he is overwhelmed by his emotions and doesn't pick up on the discrepancy until way too late. And that's because he is doing the thing that I do, where you take it and you try and ascribe some sort of more reasonable meaning to it. He says, okay, she doesn't recognize me, but that's because she's pretending, because it makes her feel more comfortable.
I don't think that it's not recognized. I think it's like she refused to marry him, right?
Right. Yeah.
And that kind of made the relationship fizzle, which at this point, right, was literally a relationship between a tween to a teen, and then it was completely and emotional only through letters. He gives the proposal, she refuses, and the relationship fizzles. And this is the first time they're going to meet face to face, and she doesn't come to him. And so he's doing the respectful thing of respecting her boundaries.
He's giving her space. Yeah, exactly. He is being super respectful. And I think he does interpret this as a mixture of, she's trying to save face for herself. She's also trying to in this imaginary world that he's constructed, Dulcinea is also trying to spare his feelings by not bringing it up in front of everybody and not making it public and not making it a big deal. And again, it's a circumstance where if you actually looked at what's actually happening, you go, there is something amiss here. There is something that does not add up. And that if I'm not constantly trying to make adjustments for other people's imaginary actions and motivations, this is pretty explicit. Everybody else can see that they've never met before, except for Palamides.
Even Cam, who was she is pissed because she's like, why are you treating him this way?
Yeah, I do this. I get really mad on behalf of my friends, about how other people are treating them.
It's she also loves Dulcinea in a different way, but she is Palamides' cavalier and other half, and all of the weird, codependent way that they are. So it's no, she's not going to be on Dulcinea's side. And she's not going to be a go-between. And she's going to be like, fuck that bitch.
Actually, you know what this also kind of goes to? So this is something that'll come up literally in like the last chapter or last 2 chapters where I can't remember who it is, but someone accuses Cytherea, once we know it's Cytherea, of not doing her research. And I think that's like dead on. That Cytherea tries to sort of interrogate Dulcinea before she kills Dulcinea on her shuttle. And Dulcinea doesn't give up this relationship. So she doesn't know it happened. But also Cytherea, like, talk about a lazy planner. Like, we talked about Gideon being kind of a lazy planner and escaping, but like Cytherea sort of planned pretty lazily. This is something I was thinking about this time. There's a line where I think Harrow says here that it occurs to her that this would be a really great way to wipe out basically the entire aristocracy just at this dinner party because all of the scions of all of the houses are there. And of course, that's literally Cytherea's plan in the context of the whole lictor challenge is like, all right, here I have all the heads of the houses and I'm going to kill them off until until God has to come back. And you have to wonder whether Cytherea deliberately pressured him into starting this, like into creating this round of the lictor challenge so that she could have all of these people in one place to murder them. I still don't totally 100% feel like I understand Cytherea's goals and her plan here.
I think that she was literally insane after 10,000 years of dying. That is just my read on her.
To quote the genie from Aladdin, 10,000 years will give you such a crick in the neck.
Something that I caught because I was really trying to pay attention to the conversations in the dinner party.
Me too.
The conversations are the fifth talking about cooking, which is just kind of funny because it brings up like the whole pomegranate thing.
They're so adorable.
You have Silas talking about fasting because he's a twat.
Checks out.
The second talking about different drive failures and like having to be wrapped in house dirt or whatever.
Well, so these things are all throwaways, but they're also all not throwaways. Like that is a good reminder that you forget about during Gideon the Ninth. You forget the degree to which this world is based in space and based in fighting in space, right? This is a reminder that it's bigger than just Canaan House.
Then you have Palamides having this pedantic
warden scholar,
the stupid joke about a skeleton key, and then you have the important conversation in all of these that feels like a throwaway, but I feel like is like the most important conversation, which is between Cytherea and Abigail. And you learn that Abigail is not going to have any children.
Yes.
Her brother is going to like take over the house. You learn that that means that she's really thrown herself into her studies and that her studies are about the lictors. And that's part of the reason that she came was more for the chance to study Canaan House itself than even to become a lictor. And she's complaining to the 6th house because the 6th house are the ones who have the original lictoral records.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't even think about that. I mean, I do want to like just add that she's very specific about the time period she's interested in too. It's not lictors in general. It is the time post-resurrection, but pre-cohort. So It's this like time period before the houses are like, I mean, I guess the houses are established, but it's
literally while they are becoming lictors.
Exactly. It's specifically the lictoral process. And she doesn't realize that's what she's looking for, but that's
maybe
like
she
specifically what she's looking for. And you're dead on that she is like, she's really interested in these documents that are being kept carefully preserved on the 6th. And she's seen copies, but that requires the 6th house to have given her sufficient copies. And we don't know what they have. We don't know what other information they have. And we don't know, I mean, none of them are terribly religious with the exception of the 8th, the 9th, and then the 2nd are really, really into following orders, which is very similar to being religious. Sorry, that was reductive. But I think that the 6th seemed like particularly secular, particularly uninterested in God for the sake of God.
Mm-hmm. That was another thing that I picked up from that conversation where I was like, oh, it's fascinating to me that the 6th are the ones with all of those records.
Oh, yeah. The other conversation that gets had is this one about Ianthe and Coronabeth. And this was one that, again, could be a throwaway, but like for me, as I said, literally in like the first time we see them, I was like, oh, Ianthe's the necromancer. Coronabeth is just pretty. And this was like, again, for me, like confirmation, because I feel like all of the part of being a necro is like being close to death. It's part of what makes the seventh house like blood defect so powerful. It's part of what would make Dulcinea a powerful necromancer were she here, is that you're like half dead. And I feel like Ianthe starts from a point of thanergy, from a point of near death. And that's part of why she's a powerful necromancer when you compare her to Corona Beth.
I don't understand the line that Silas says about like your parents risked intervention.
We learn later that they wanted a matched pair, that they really wanted to have twin necromancers. And I feel like that's a weird desire anyway. So like, I don't really know what to take away from that. But you're right that Silas specifically asked that, and the indication is like, maybe should they have let Ianthe die? Should they have let the mother die? Like, I don't know what that means, really.
Like, almost wondering if like that would have triggered necromancy in Corona,
or potentially it would have like eliminated necromancy in Ianthe. That like giving her oxygen too soon would have. I have no fucking idea. I got nothing.
Yeah. I just thought it was really weird. I was like, I don't understand what risked intervention meant. And Ianthe was like, well, I mean, the option was me dying. We're not religious nuts like you.
This has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But I run our Instagram, and it's the first time I've been on the internet because I'm not an internet person. I've been trying to follow various Gideon the Ninth like fan art accounts in order to get us seen a little bit. And so I've been exposed for the first time to the Gideon the Ninth fan art that exists. And it turns out that 99% of it is people who think that Ianthe is like crazy hot. And it's all just Ianthe like eating a heart, dripping blood.
I forget that because I've been on the internet. I forget how much that you wouldn't realize that everybody is fucking obsessed with Ianthe.
Why are we obsessed with her? She's such a, oh my gosh. She's a monster. She is not a good person, first of all. Secondly, she's the shadow of her hot twin. So I will take Corona Beth any day. I have no follow-up to this. She just seems like such a bummer of a person.
I think it's just, she's actually the worst, but it's compelling.
I will buy that, and I am a fan of people who are the worst. My thing is, like, if you've ever done way too many drugs and the next day you're just like, you feel like you've been stretched out so impossibly thin that you're gonna die.
Like butter scraped over too much bread.
She's that as a person, but thank you. Tamsin Muir knew it from the get-go. Do you ever get the urge to do air horn sounds? I get the urge to do it.
Act 6. 5? 8? I've lost track, honestly. Well, that was a lot of fun and a lot of spoiling. But don't worry, we'll be back to spoil more things next week. After we've got all this wrap-up out of our system, we'll be reading some short stories before starting on Harrow the Ninth. If you want to follow along with us, our reading calendar is available on our website at frontlinefifth.podbean.com, and you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok, which are linked in the show notes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends and give us a 5-star rating anywhere you can. And of course, if you didn't enjoy the podcast, feel free to lie. We have a Patreon, which you can join for access to bonus content every month. You can become a patron, and we do love our patrons, at patreon.com/frontlinefifth. Finally, if you have any fun theories you'd like to share with us, feel free to email us at frontlinefifth@gmail.com. With that, I'll just remind you not to unlock any tombs or enter any doors without permission because, ghosts. Bye! Do you like this version of my voice? I did it first thing in the morning just for you. Frontline Fifth is a Locked Tomb podcast conceived by Maria Adamako and starring Maria Adamako, Hannah Grenwald, Brooke Anderson, and John Ryan. Our cover art was designed and created by Maria Adamako, who also edited this episode. Our fabulous music was composed and recorded by Blake Anderson. The Locked Tomb series is a completely dope-ass book series by Tamsin Muir, who does not know we exist and is in no way affiliated with this podcast.